I'm speaking with Justin Peniston, uh, writer and co-creator of the comic book, the webcomic Hunter Black, and also recently announced writer on Sonic, the series coming out in 2022. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me on.
And I'll say for all my listeners and viewers, Justin and I have known each other for many, many years. So if the conversation seems very familiar at points, that's why.
That's because it is.
Yeah. All right, cool. So tell me about, let's talk about Hunter Black. Where did you've been writing for years. Where did the idea for Hunter Black come from? Like where, because you have a million ideas in your head, why did that one pop up and become the idea that you chased?
So my collaborator, William Orr, and I
Mhm.
were roommates at the time. And we had both discovered the graphic novel adaptations of Richard Stark's Parker novels,
Mhm.
done by cartoonist Darwin Cook. Rest in peace. And so we read the first one, the adaptation, the graphic novel adaptation of The Hunter.
Mhm.
And The Hunter has been, sort of made into movies a bunch of times. Payback is the one that, with Mel Gibson, is the one that stands out in my mind as being an adaptation of that story.
Mhm.
It's basically the story of a crook, a thief, who gets betrayed by some people and ends up in prison for the first time ever in his
Oh.
career.
Mhm.
And he escapes, and he wants revenge, and he wants his money.
Mhm.
You know, um, and it's this really like hard boiled, kick ass crime story.
Mhm.
And Darwin Cook did was famously, he was an animator
Mhm.
with WB for a while. He worked on some of the Bruce Timm Batman the Animated Series type stuff,
Mhm.
and then really did some comics with DC. Worked on Catwoman. He did the Justice League New Frontier comic, which is one of the best comics ever done, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was excited to take a look at his uh, Parker stuff because I'm a bit of a fan of noir comics in particular.
Uh-huh.
Um, and we were blown away, absolutely blown away by these books. They were so amazing. And I think after I read it the first time, I ran into Will's room and I was like, dude, I want to make something like this.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a writer, he was an artist. At the time, we thought, whatever we do next is going to be an animation pitch.
Mhm.
Um, he really wants to work in animation. Comics definitely were not something that was on his radar in particular. Um, and I just knew that we wanted to work together on something. Now, we didn't want to just completely rip off what we were reading,
Right.
but and coincidentally, as you may know, Cris, um, Will and I were both big Dungeons and Dragons nerds.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
You
oh
you
yeah.
play D&D?
Indeed. I may have rolled a d20 once or twice. And so we immediately thought, okay, let's do a fantasy version of this kind of story. Let's do a hard boiled
Mhm.
fantasy comic, or at the time, animation pitch.
Mhm.
And so we started putting this stuff together. I started working on what I thought was going to be a series Bible. And Will started doing some designs. And the more into it we got, the more we liked what we were coming up with.
Mhm.
And the more we thought, because at the time, this is like 11 years ago almost, um, we thought nobody's buying this cartoon. No one's putting this cartoon on the air. It was a little too bloody, a little too, it wasn't, we hadn't really entered the full-on era of Adult Swim and streaming or anything like that yet.
Oh,
So we
okay.
thought it was just a little before its time.
Mhm.
Um, but we didn't want to abandon the idea, and we didn't want to be beholden to anybody else. We didn't
Mhm.
want to beg for the chance to get the story out there. So we decided, let's just do a webcomic,
Mhm.
which we had never done before. We did some research. Um,
Let me ask you
what?
this real quick though.
Sure.
Had like what was your experience at that point with working on in animation writing?
I think I had no experience writing animation at that point.
Like, how much industry experience did you have? I guess that's the point of the question.
Now or then?
Then, at that
Then
time.
I had some comics experience,
Mhm.
but animation was something I was thinking, we were going to try to break into.
Okay.
Um, Honestly, it was probably Hunter Black was one of the things that greased the wheels. Maybe I had started writing. I A few years before I started Hunter Black, I had a few comics credits to my name,
Yep.
and I had befriended some of the guys from Man of Action, Joe Kelly and Duncan Rouleau and Steven Seagal and Joe Casey.
Mhm.
And they had advised me a little bit on how to pursue my career because I'd all worked in comics, of course. And eventually, one of them came to me and said, "Hey, have you ever written an animation? And if not, do you want to?"
Mhm.
And so I think the guys at Man of Action are pretty cool about, they executive produce shows, so they have more work than they can do just themselves.
Mhm.
And B, I think they like to develop, people that they have a rapport with. And so I was lucky enough to be one of those people, and they took me on and had me. I mean, first thing I did with them was on a European, an Italian cartoon called Gormiti Nature Unleashed,
Yeah.
and I wrote 2 or 3 episodes of that. And one of the Gormiti series is actually on Netflix now, although it's not the one I worked on.
You jump forward there to how you got on Sonic. Is that is that sort of what you're answering now?
Oh no, well, just how, because this was all happening sort of around the same time. Hunter Black and me getting into animation was sort of happening concurrently.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It wasn't until, but they were just so distinct from each other. You know what I mean? And honestly, it hasn't been until just recently that I felt, okay, maybe I have enough connections and enough juice to at least get good animation pitches made and looked at.
Mhm.
But back to Hunter Black,
Yeah.
at the time, I we wanted to do animation. We quickly realized we probably weren't going to be able to do animation,
Mhm.
and so we moved it into being a comic because we were both super excited about it. I mean, it's everyone who reads Hunter Black kind of knows this, but I started off by taking a lot of the characters and straight up naming them after D&D characters. A lot of
Hey,
characters from old D&D campaigns have ended
hey,
up in this comic.
why not? It's pretty cool to do it.
um, so the first Darwin cookbook was called The Hunter.
Mhm.
And so I straight up, we were like, this is an homage. We're going to call it Hunter Black.
Yeah.
That's going to be his name.
Uh-huh.
And that, some of the same basic premise stuff is in there. Hunter is a criminal who is betrayed by, people who he worked with, and he ends up imprisoned, and he escapes and wants his revenge.
Yeah.
That we just took that and ran with it in a different direction. I like to think, Star Trek was Wagon Train to the Stars. It was a space western.
Mhm.
Then Star Wars was a space western.
Yeah.
Firefly was a space western.
Yeah.
But they all feel very distinct from each other.
Right.
And so that's kind of what we were thinking. We took the basic idea behind what Darwin Cook was doing and what Richard Stark before him had done,
Mhm.
and decided to put our own stamp on that sort of, revenge crime stories, genre.
So when you figured out how to do a web comic, all the business side and how to the technical side and all that,
Uh-huh.
well, how much work was that? Like figuring all that out? Was it tough?
Um, yes and no. It's not tough to start doing a webcomic. Figuring out how to do that wasn't that hard.
Mhm.
Figuring out how to do it well is a work in progress always.
Mhm.
Um,
Like, what do you when you say, well, where's the well part come in? Like, what could you do wrong?
oh, well, the first thing we learned, and I think that this is something we really took to heart, was that the biggest thing to make someone lose interest in a webcomic, particularly a long form webcomic like what we're doing. You know, because ours isn't like a daily strip. Ours is, you know, a page of a long comic. It gets posted 3 times a week. So it was vital that we don't have delays, that we don't miss days, that we stick to a schedule. And we have only missed a posting day 1 time in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And that was only because we straight up blanked on it. You know, we thought, you know, each thought the other had posted the page. We didn't worry about it. And we went a whole weekend without realizing, oh, we didn't post Friday's page, you know. And there was no, you know, we didn't have a good excuse. We just forgot. But that's happened only 1 time. We've never had a problem with content. I mean, we decided from the beginning that we would always be at least 4 weeks ahead before we started, you know. And the idea was, at the time, we were only posting 2 pages a week. So we didn't post our first page until we were working on page 9.
Okay.
And right now, because both Will and I have a lot going on, we both, whenever we have a free moment, work like mad on Hunter Black, you know, to make sure that we always have a cushion in case we get stuck having to do other stuff for a long periods of time. I think Will is 5 or 6 weeks ahead in terms of, you know, pages, and I'm probably another month ahead of that in terms of writing.
I'm speaking with Justin Peniston, writer and co-creator of the indie comic Hunter Black, and writer on the new Sonic series. You can find more information about his work at hunterblackcomx.com. If you like this episode of Full Contact Nerd interviews so far, please tap the like button and hit the subscribe button. If you want interviews with writers and creative people or daily book suggestions in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, film history, gaming, and more, check out fullcontactnerd.com and my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you want to hear interviews with military historians or get daily history book suggestions, check out warscholar.org and my podcast, Military History Inside Out. If you want to hear interviews with space scientists, space historians, and technology experts, or get daily space and science book suggestions, check out technologyandspace.com and my podcast, Technology and Space. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video. How do you plot out something that is lasting this long? You know, how far in advance can you plot it, you know?
Well, we always knew the ultimate end, you know. Okay. We knew where point A was, and we knew where point Z was. And shortly before we got started, we figured out where points B, C, D, and E were. You know what I mean? After that, we just knew that somewhere we had to connect E to Z. And we're going to keep doing it until it's time to get around to wrapping it up. You know what I mean? Until we feel like we're done. But we are definitely starting to close in on, you know, beginning to end, if that makes sense. I mean, I think we could squeeze for ourselves. We probably have maybe we have a few more years, I'm sure, you know, before we call it quits. I don't think right now we're telling stories, you know what I mean? And what'll happen is I'll say, I want, you know, okay, for the next story, I want X to happen in Hunter's quest for revenge, you know? And sometimes it's something that takes him away from his quest for revenge, or sometimes, you know, I might decide, hey, I want him to try and fail to take out one of his opponents, or, you know, something. And usually at this point now, because we've done so many pages, there's something that we've talked about or done already that I want to explore further, you know, and so that'll usually take place. And, you know, to a degree, I think a certain amount of my political or philosophical leanings play into how I decide what we're going to do for a story. For example, we're right now setting up our 5th volume. And I'm making it very clear that the setting is at war. And, from a storytelling standpoint, that war, that's not Hunter Black's concern. He doesn't care about the war. He cares about his revenge. It's just an obstacle, Okay. But, I thought if the world is at war, how would that affect, how does that change things? And I thought, okay, it might be interesting. War affects, innocence. So, the women and children are often, the ones displaced and, murdered, in wars that they're not actively fighting in, Right. And I thought, well, if there's a world of wizards and warriors, how would those innocents be protected? So I decided that some of the female wizards got together and made a safe zone. And, they're basically keeping all but, the very old and very young in terms of men out. And, but otherwise allowing women and their children to be in. And some of the people that Hunter are after are women, and they've taken refuge in there. Yeah. And so Hunter's got to figure out how to get in there and get after them, So, yeah. And, it's, and because I'm interested in the way, choices by governments and by big organizations, affect, the little guy. So that's, and at the same time, I'm interested in, wizards making, making cool barriers to, stuff like that. So,
yeah. So what would you say Hunter Black's, what's his alignment?
Ooh, his alignment is probably true neutral. I mean, he kills for money. He kills people for money. He was a hitman. That was his, his thing. But he did have a certain scruples about it. He, before he began his quest for revenge, it was, it was never personal. He wouldn't take just any job, he killed people he thought that person kind of deserves to die. I'm going to go ahead and take him out, but no matter how you put a shine on it, murder's not a good thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. But Hunter doesn't really, as a rule, cause pain for pain's sake. He's not really a torturer or anything like that. He's just good at killing, and that's how he made his money. So, true neutral, maybe neutral evil. He has a loose ethos right now. It's really driven by his need for revenge, though. But he doesn't like breaking his word. He's so angry at having been betrayed. He doesn't like betraying other people. He's aware of that, how that would be hypocritical. And he has people that he cares about. At first he didn't seem to care about anybody, but he's developed relationships over time. And sometimes he realizes this relationship means something to me, and he's forced to confront the question, does it mean more to me than my revenge? What means more to me? And what am I willing to do? Am I willing to put this relationship at risk for the sake of, killing somebody?
How about meditation, or just accepting things as is and letting his anger go? How about that?
I have definitely played with the idea of him trying to move on, not through meditation, because, come on, but, he's definitely been given the opportunity to sort of give up his quest. And the problem is he's got this magic sword, and this magic sword is specifically there to take revenge, and he's also got he's going to die. Hunter Black he's got a terminal disease, and the sword is keeping him alive. A little touch of Elric, Michael Moorcock in there. Yeah. And he sort of has to pursue his quest. He doesn't have a whole lot of choice in the matter. And every time he thinks about, maybe I shouldn't do this, something bad inevitably happens. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So since I mentioned before off camera about Redditors asking about your comic book writing experience.
Yeah,
So can you talk about some of the industry stuff? You know, the big
sure.
company stuff.
So I mean, I wanted to be a writer in comics basically since college. And at that point, you know, and this was 30 years ago, nobody's really telling you how to get into comics, you know. And 30 years ago, comics were probably at the height of their popularity.
Mm-hmm.
And the horrible thing about comics as a business is that it's a job where there are way more people who want your job
Mm-hmm.
than there are jobs available. Way more, you know. I mean, comics is kind of unique. Not everyone who goes to the movies wants to make movies.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But almost everyone who reads comics wants to make comics. You know, it's really crazy. And they all think they can do a better job than you do, you know. So you have to stand out because in the comics business, anybody, you know, there's always someone else looking for that job. You know, there's certainly no comic company has a hard time finding bodies, you know. They have a hard time finding people under deadline sometimes, but that's a whole different thing.
Right.
So it took me a while, you know, of beating my head against the wall by mailing, you know, submissions and thoughts and ideas to various companies and having them return saying, yeah, we're not going to read this, or, you know, that's fine, but no, you know, getting lots of rejections. Yeah. Finally, I met an artist who was kind of in the same boat as I was, wanted to get into it, but didn't really know how to do it. Mm-hmm. And we decided to work together and make our own comic. Mm-hmm. So we put together what's called an ashcan, you know, basically a disposable comic, a comic you can show people to say this, look, it's like a proof of concept, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But it's called an ashcan because at the end of the day, no one's saving that. No one's sticking it in plastic and hoping, you know, they'll toss it in the ashcan when they're done, you know.
Yeah. Until you become famous, and then everyone wishes they had that.
And they still had it, exactly. So we did. Me and my buddy Matt Filer put together an ashcan for a comic series called Mask of the Dragons. You know, mm. And it was a modern fantasy. You know, fantasy is my thing. So. Mm. And we put it together. We thought we'd try to sell it or, you know, pitch it to companies. And that didn't go over but so well. But I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mail a copy of this to every editor at DC Comics. Hmm. So I did that. I got the names of every editor, and I mailed it out to everyone who was working at DC at the time. Mm-hmm. And eventually somebody got back to me and said, hey, this is pretty good. I like your voice. How would you feel about doing a fill-in issue for me? And so I got the chance to write a fill-in issue of Blue Beetle for DC. Yeah. And that was, I will never forget the day that I got that phone call from Joan Hilty, the editor at DC Comics. I mean, I was talking to her, and my wife at the time and her best friend were all here. Mm-hmm. And maybe even Will was here. But, I mean, I was on the phone just crying my eyes out, but keeping my voice steady because I was so happy, you know. Yeah. You know, this was with Nerdvana. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. This was, you know, like I'm going to write for DC Comics. Yeah. And, you know, they asked me to pitch. So I pitched 5 or 6 different story ideas, you know, just one and done stories. And eventually she picked one she liked. She's going, this sounds cool. I did a few drafts of a script for it, and eventually, you know, they bought my script and turned it into an issue. And that was tremendously cool, you know. And the sad thing was I didn't really get to talk to the artist until after it was done. You know, we weren't collaborating during the process. I would like to think that my scripts are very artist friendly. I know I try to make them artist friendly. You know, whether or not I succeed is, you know, not up to me. Mm-hmm. Because a comic script is, at the end of the day, it's a set of instructions, you know, to the artist. Here's what you need to do, you know. And my definition of artist friendly is I'm very clear about what must be in the page, and I try not to step all over their ability to add things to the page as they see fit.
Mhm.
You know,
So, how many pages is a comic book issue script?
at the time, the standard was 22 pages. There is no hard and fast rule for how many pages a comic can be. Comics have always said, you know, extra size issue. This is a 36-page issue or 48-page issue or however many, you know, 60 pages. Like that's happened.
Mhm.
At the time, 22 pages was the standard. I think 20 pages is the standard now.
Okay. So, and then you did some stuff. You've done stuff after other comic books.
Yeah, I after working at DC, doing that one fill-in, I did another story for DC. I did an anthology piece about the character Mr. Terrific,
Mhm.
and then I had my first one of my first big setbacks in my writing career
Mm.
because I was in discussions to do a limited series that I pitched at DC for a character named Sand, who is a member of the Justice Society of America and, you know, has sort of a noirish feel, you know, and he's a legacy character. And I had this really cool idea. There was discussion of an artist attached. And at the time, I was also a bartender working for the Hard Rock Cafe. And just as all of this is going forward, I get sent to open a new cafe in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
And those things, those openings, opening a new restaurant it's hard work, you know, and they're, you know, 16, 20-hour days are not uncommon,
Mhm.
you know. And so I got there and I did that, and I wasn't staying in touch with the people I needed to stay in touch with. And I let that slip through my fingers. You know what I mean? I think maybe the tide also turned against me. Like, I'm not sure it would have gotten done even if I had been on point.
Okay.
But I mean, I don't know that for sure. I know that from myself that I know how I dropped the ball. I prioritized the job that was making me money over the dream job, and you know, and I paid the price.
Yeah.
And that was the last time I worked for DC Comics. I but I did I've done a lot of indie stuff since then. I worked for IDW for Space Goat Publications when that was around. I've self-published some stuff. You know, I put a few comics out there, and I'd like to say that you know, people have always genuinely seemed to like what I was doing. You know, I haven't gotten a whole lot of negative reviews, which is comforting,
Mhm.
but I also haven't gotten a whole lot of reviews, period.
Mhm.
So, you know, who's to say that, you know, the negative reviews weren't a coming? Um,
Yeah.
and that then we start doing Hunter Black.
Mhm.
I start getting into animation. Come to find out that it's way easier and more profitable to break into animation, at least for me, than it was, you know, than it is to do comics. You know,
Wow. Okay.
you know, I think animation seems way more daunting to the average would-be writer. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I think people think that comics would be easy as a lower bar to clear, but I'm not sure that's the case. I think it's much harder to get into comics than it is into animation.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
So just to, I know some people who are into Sonic will just ask, they'll just wonder because you mentioned before your connection to the game, you know?
Oh yeah. You know, I was an early adopter. Well, I shouldn't say that. I had a Sega Genesis, you
Yeah.
know, and my favorite Sega Genesis game was Sonic the Hedgehog.
Mhm.
I played out of Sonic the Hedgehog, you know, like I played it to the point where, you know, I could execute at least the first half of the game like flawlessly. You know, I could get every ring and do every, you know, like just not worry about, you know, missing my Chaos Emeralds and all, whatever, you know, and I
Mhm.
just loved it. And it, you know, it was one of those early games that had a surprisingly 3D feel, you know, as the
Mhm.
16-bit games were, you know, expanding, you know, it looked more fully fleshed out and more animation like
Mhm.
than its predecessors. And so you know, I loved it. Um, I, but that is the Sonic game that I really was into, you know.
Mhm.
I sort of, I don't want to say I outgrew it. My video game interests moved in different directions. And if I'm being honest, if you're offering me the choice of playing a video game or playing D&D, I'm going to play D&D.
Yeah.
And that's, that's sort of my,
So, not to go into any details, but at the time, were you of a writer state of mind back when you were playing? Did you come up with like other scenarios or like imaginative stuff to do with the game at the time? Or was you
not at the time. Not at the time, no. I think I saw it much more as a puzzle to be solved than a story to be told.
Okay.
But I would be lying if I said I hadn't thought about writing video games since then. Subsequently, video games have become so varied. I've thought about maybe wanting to get into writing video games at some point. But
Yeah, that's a big right now at this point, video games are so cinematic that
yeah,
writing for them seems pretty, like you're almost writing a movie with a bunch of different like 10 times as many scenes because you could go any direction and
they're so interactive that you basically have to find a number of possible outcomes and write them all out, and yeah, writing a video game seems like a huge task. I mean, they're basically choose your own adventure writ extra large,
Yeah.
if you remember the old choose your own adventure books.
Oh, I do. How many viewers and listeners might. I'm speaking with Justin Peniston, writer and co-creator of the indie comic Hunter Black and writer on the new Sonic series. You can find more information about his work at hunterblackcomx.com. If you like this episode of Full Contact Nerd interviews so far, please tap the like button and hit the subscribe button. If you want interviews with writers and creative people or daily book suggestions in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, film history, gaming, and more, check out fullcontactnerd.com and my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you want to hear interviews with military historians or get daily history book suggestions, check out warscholar.org and my podcast, Military History Inside Out. If you want to hear interviews with space scientists, space historians, and technology experts, or get daily space and science book suggestions, check out technologyandspace.com and my podcast, Technology and Space. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video. Actually, I was going to mention, I just came across the issue of Mask that I got. I just came across that going through some of my stuff, and I was like, oh man.
Yeah.
Past, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I look back on that now, it looks incredibly amateurish to me,
No, it looks pretty cool.
It's it's got a real indie comics vibe to it, I've been lucky to do enough work and to have some incredibly talented collaborators, and I think even now Matt would look back on his work on Mask of the Dragons and be like, oh my God, I don't want anyone looking at this, but that's how Will feels about the earliest pages of Hunter Black too. He's not happy with those at all, and they were great, is he better now? Sure. But they were great, and I have a hard time with my own work. I just do. I have a hard time watching episodes that I've written. That's really weird to me. I have a hard time reading my comics. If I'm reading Hunter Black stuff, I'm only doing it for reference now. I do it because I'm like, wait, I have to make sure I don't want to break my own continuity. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
yeah. So what are some of your favorite comic book titles from the past and comic book characters? Because I know you have a lot of friends in the industry, so you might be tempted to name some of those. But let's talk about when you were young.
So there were a lot of things. I mean, I was a DC and a Marvel kid growing up, I loved the biggies. I loved Superman, Batman, Flash, and Green Lantern. Those four characters absolutely, filled my mind. I especially Superman and Batman. in fact, it's fair to say I was more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy. But once I started getting, older, I started getting into my teen years, and my reading taste became a little more sophisticated. And this is the '80s. It was impossible not to be drawn to what Marvel was doing.
Well, DC had all those. They started doing all the, like, what was it? The Vertigo, the
Oh yeah, the Vertigo stuff. Yeah, like
Preacher and
Sandman and Preacher, and yeah, I mean, but that stuff was a little later. That's more like I was a young adult by that time. I mean, I think Sandman came out in '88 or '89. I think is when it debuted, and Vertigo didn't even exist yet then. That was Vertigo was still like a year down the road. And don't get me wrong, I was all about those. I mean, when you're like 17, 18 years old, and all of a sudden there are comics that are geared towards you, you know what I mean? That, because I was, a budding male, and, and I was a bit rebellious and doing my own thing. And, the comics were like that, at that time, so that was kind of cool. But before that, I mean, I look back on it now and it's shockingly right-wing to me, but I was absolutely weaned on the works of Frank Miller when I was a kid. His Daredevil, was arguably the most exciting thing I could think of back then, although the writer who probably influenced me the most in good ways and in bad was Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont is a comics writing genius. Don't get me wrong when I say good ways and bad, but at the beginning of his run, he is a much better writer at the end of his time, on the X-Men than he was at the beginning. Okay. He does a lot of telling you things that you're already seeing. He was super wordy at first, and I devoured his X-Men comics because they were still exciting, and so I tended to be I had some of his same flaws. I tended to be a little wordy. I had to learn how to show and not tell. You know what I mean? But I mean, come on. Those X-Men comics at the time are the most foundational comics there are. Everyone knows those comics, even people who didn't read comics.
Yeah.
John Byrne, of course, was, the hottest artist in comics in the early to mid '80s, and, was probably not as well heralded as a writer as he should have been. I mean, his Fantastic Four run was, also, if I had to pick a favorite run of comics ever, I would be very tempted to say John Byrne's Fantastic Four run.
Wow.
Yeah.
And considering how poorly Fantastic Four movies have done compared to the other Marvel comic book movies.
Well, I think that Marvel Studios and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think they have a very singular vision. They understand how to embrace their characters and how to let go of the things that won't work in film. You know what I mean? But they embrace those characters at their essence. And the other companies are Sony and Fox were a lot more hit or miss in that regard. I mean, if you're telling a Fantastic Four story and it's not at its heart about a group of heroes who are a family, and who are also devoted to learning more about the world, I mean, they're basically, it's almost like they're Star Trek, they're explorers, and they don't, fighting supervillains is not their first mandate. Exploring unexplored areas is really what they're into, learning things and, going places no one else can go because they have these amazing powers.
Right.
So if you're not doing bonkers, over the top, crazy sci-fi weirdness, but, with a beating heart around a family, then you're not going to do a good Fantastic Four story, which is why the best Fantastic Four movie is still The Incredibles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's, at its heart, it's a story about family,
Yeah. Yeah, the Fantastic Four movies seem to be just about your usual fighting the bad guys kind of stuff. And
They to me, they seem to have missed the point thus far. Um, I do like, and this is not a popular opinion. I do like the fact that they went with really young versions of the Fantastic Four in the last much maligned Josh Trank version.
Mhm.
Because I think at the end of the day, Mr. Fantastic's real superpower is his intellect, not his stretching.
Mhm.
And that's a much cooler power. Amazing intellect is much more interesting in the young than it is in the old, to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think a prodigy is more interesting than, an older, experienced, wizened scientist.
Right. So tell me about, oh, actually, I want to ask about, were you going to comic book conventions a lot, to
Oh,
connect with the industry?
absolutely. I went to, well, I shouldn't say I went to comic conventions a lot. I went to San Diego a lot. I went to San Diego every year for like 15 years straight. And, I met people there and formed relationships there, including the Man of Action guys. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am today in my writing career. I didn't start doing other cons regularly until I wanted to have a table at cons and started, and to sell Hunter Black stuff and promote the book. And that's when I started, branching out to other cons like New York and C2E2 and WonderCon and, LA Comic Con and stuff like that.
How useful was doing that? Did it seem like it was worth? Do you get the juice from the squeeze?
It's funny that you say that because I've been wanting to start my own comics imprint called Freshly Squeezed Comics because I want to say we've got the juice, we got the pulp. That's my that's why I would want to do that. Freshly Squeezed Comics. But in the moment, it always seemed like I wasn't really getting anywhere. But there's no doubt that showing up, being recognized, forming just the simple, hey, how are you? Good to see you again, relationships paid off. You know what I mean? Persistence helped, people seeing you there over and over again, that makes a difference, I mean, there are editors who know who I am just because they saw me a bunch of times at Comic-Con and they know that I have been working, and like, I had some really great experience. I met Geoff Johns at San Diego one year, and he and I just hit it off. And I mean, this was a guy. He was at the time, at the top of the industry, and he and I sat in a bar and talked about Aquaman and Hawkman and Martian Manhunter and just why we like these characters and what worked about them and what didn't work about them, and how you had to embrace some of the weirdness and some of the corniness to really make them work. That if you ignored the parts that's made that, were so intrinsic to the character, like, like all the goody two shoes white breadness of Superman, you ignored that, you weren't going to, why tell a Superman story then? You know what I mean? Like, we had a great conversation, and that later led to, some other opportunities, at least to talk to people. And later on, Geoff gave me a personal tour of the DC Comics offices once they moved to Burbank. And again, just because it was a great experience. It didn't necessarily lead to work. It wasn't, it wasn't that kind of networking. Like I'm not, I don't know. I don't want to be and I don't want to be an opportunist. You know what I'm saying? I want to be genuine. And I had some really cool, genuine experiences out of that. It was really nice, Yeah.
Well, I think if you're having fun with what you're doing, it shows.
Yes,
and
I agree.
And obviously, you're having fun. Tell me about some of the other stuff that inspires you, like beyond comic books, and let's go into shows, movies, books.
Oh man,
I know it's a ton. It's a lot of stuff, but
yeah, I mean, like most people my age, I mean, Star Wars was a transformative, thing for me. Seeing Star Wars for the first time as a little kid in the theater, I don't know that I'd be the same person if that hadn't happened. You know what I mean? That was incredibly, I mean, as I talk to you now over the computer, right behind my monitor is a Star Wars movie poster on the wall. You know what I mean? Like that is there's no overstating the power of that on me. I don't talk about this. I don't mention this a lot, when people ask me this question, but I'm suddenly struck that I remember when I was in the 7th grade, and that was the year that the first G.I. Joe animated miniseries came out.
Yeah.
And it came on at 3:00, and we got out of school at 2:50. And my school was a little over a mile away from my house, and I walked to and from school. So I had to run my chubby, that mile to get home in time to watch G.I. Joe that week. And like, after I saw the first episode, I was so hooked. I was like, it blew me away. And I absolutely had to, to see everything. And that era of cartoons, the era of G.I. Joe and Transformers and Thundercats, that stuff is definitely deep in my soul.
Yeah.
Let me see. I really loved watching Robotech on Saturday mornings. My little brother would come up to my bedroom in the attic and wake me up every Saturday, and we'd watch Saturday morning cartoons, and starting with Robotech, because it wasn't as popular as it should have been. And I had no idea that Robotech was actually 3 different cartoons mashed into one. At the time, like, it all made, it was so cool. I was, part of that generation of kids that grew up with Dukes of Hazzard and Knight Rider and Airwolf, the vehicle action shows.
Yeah.
What
about role-playing games back then? Like, apart from D&D, which others did you dabble in?
D&D is my first love. Make no mistake. I always come back to D&D. I'm not a game mechanics person, so exploring other fantasy role-playing games is not really my thing. But I did play RPGs and other genres. I played the Marvel superheroes game and Villains and Vigilantes and Champions all at different times. I tried them all. I briefly played Boot Hill as a kid.
Yeah.
I briefly played Top Secret as a kid.
Yeah.
I think I played Gamma World once or twice as a kid. I had all that stuff. I played the Star Wars role-playing game for a while. Yeah, and in fact, I even ran a campaign briefly set in my own original universe that was really more heavily influenced by the comic book Dreadstar than by Star Wars, And I was repurposing force powers as magic, and doing that kind of thing. That was fun.
Okay. You ever play Paranoia?
No.
I've
never played Paranoia. No, I played Call of Cthulhu and I played Chill.
Oh, okay.
Those. Let me tell you, a good horror role-playing game is hard to pull off, but when it's successful, it's amazing. Amazing. Some of the best fun I've ever had.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. I'm currently playing. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I ate up Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I've seen probably 2/3 of all Star Trek has to offer. I've seen every episode of Next Generation, every episode of DS9, every episode of Voyager. I've seen not that much of Enterprise. I've seen every episode of Discovery, every episode of Lower Decks, every episode of Picard, most of the original series, almost none of the original animated series.
Which is pretty good, actually. I recommend you read or watch that.
I mean to. It's on my list.
Yeah.
I've seen all the movies except for Star Trek V: Final Frontier, because I keep hearing how bad it is. So I'm like, why do that to myself? And now I'm currently playing Star Trek Adventures online with some other, quarantined folks.
Oh, what's that?
It's a relatively recent Star Trek RPG. It's really cool. It's one of those games that you're sort of bargaining with the DM the whole time, with the game master. You have to convince them that your solutions to problems make sense and are workable. You're aided by, if you know Star Trek lore, that really helps. If you know, can pull off Star Trek, science technobabble, you know what I mean? If you can pull that off and make it sound convincing, that helps you, you basically have a list of like 6 attributes and a list of 6 like disciplines. And the disciplines are like command, con, engineering, science, medicine, security,
Okay.
And you combine, so you have you say you want to, I don't know, you want to beam somebody into a difficult environment, you try to couple your reason, skill with your engineering attribute, and that gives you a score, and you have to roll under that. But the way the game works is you have to get a certain number of successes. And so what you do is you have talents and skills and things like that allow you to add die to your roll. So like I might need 3 successes to beam, the away team into this difficult environment.
Okay.
But I only get 2 dice. But the ship that I'm on, if it's a ship I'm familiar with, that will give me a dice. If I have a focus in, transporter technology, I can get an extra die from that. Like there's all kinds of ways to, if I have an engineering team, I can get them to help me, someone else to work, the pattern buffers or whatever. And, oh, let me tell you, it rewards being a nerd in such a big way, and I find it, I'm playing with a group of people that I have not met any of them face to face, but we are having the best time. They're fun role players. The game master, Tilly Bridges, she is really on point, and right now she's telling it, we are like, I'm an Andorian chief engineer. I'm so nerdy. This is so much fun. I am an Andorian chief engineer of the USS Excalibur, which is a Galaxy class ship. The Excalibur A, actually, because the original was destroyed. We just went on a covert mission into the neutral zone and found a base with photon torpedoes in it that had cloaking devices, and the warheads were miniaturized Genesis devices from the Wrath of Khan. Like, it was crazy, you know what I mean? Like, it was so cool, and you're like, oh, this is a huge threat. And Tilly, the GM, is running another game with another group, and our next session, our 2 ships are going to meet up. Like, it's going to be a crossover. Yeah, it's like, it's really fun. It's really cool.
So I guess I've already figured out, well, where in the timeline, the Star Trek timeline, does
our campaign?
World?
Is currently, it's set like 5 years after Star Trek Nemesis, after the last Next Generation movie.
Okay.
So it's after that Next Generation to Voyager era of shows, but because Nemesis is set after the end of Voyager, but well before Picard and stuff like that.
Right. So you haven't mentioned any fantasy books. And others, obviously, you like D&D, but what about fantasy stuff?
I was obviously, a Tolkien reader. I've read Lord of the Rings any number of times. I went through my Dragonlance phase, which is the marriage of fantasy novels and D&D.
Yeah.
I read the Shannara books. I'm a huge fan of the fantasy novels by David and Lee Eddings, like the Belgariad and the Malorian and the Elenium. Those are all fun series. And I regret that I was reading so much. This is when I grew up, but so much typical sword and sorcery, Euro-centric fantasy, I'm now more interested in modern fantasy. Less swords and sorcery, more street mages and stuff like that. I read about a year ago this amazing novel called Ninth House by Lee Bardugo.
Okay.
And it's basically like, to oversimplify it, it's the girl with the dragon tattoo meets Harry Potter.
Huh, okay.
And man, it is so cool. You're like, it is set at Yale University, and there are the secret societies of Yale, which are famous.
Right.
They're all attached to different disciplines of magic.
Oh,
And it's really cool. It's a really cool book. And so it's this murder mystery with this, basically like, for lack of a better term, she's like a scholarship student who doesn't belong there. She doesn't fit in the Ivy League, and she's she's a recovering drug addict, and she's a street kid, but she's also a bit of a magical prodigy, and so she gets embroiled in a murder mystery on campus, and it was a tremendous book. It's the only book I've read by Leigh Bardugo, but I know she's got other novels, and actually, I think on Netflix, there's a new series coming out in, I think it's April, called Shadow and Bone, based on one of her fantasy series.
Right.
And so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to watch that first before I read the books, because I believe you watch before you read. Because, well, if you watch after you read, you become so aware of what was left out and what wasn't done, But I feel like the books are primed to be a more enjoyable experience for me than movies or shows, as a rule.
Right. Makes sense.
So I like to watch first so I can enjoy them on their own merits, and then get the more fuller experience by reading the books. Right. Only twice have I thought the adaptation is as good or better than the books, and that was Silence of the Lambs and The Expanse.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the Expanse books. I haven't. I started reading one of them, but yeah, as you know, I'm watching the series.
Yeah. How far are you into the series now?
So I'm wrapping up season 1. Yeah, I'm gonna have to start season 2. I was gonna start binging it again.
That is by far, season 1 is by far the worst season of the show. By far. Like, if you make it through season 1, you will be rewarded for your patience.
Yeah.
1,000-fold in the following seasons.
Yeah.
Like our mutual friend Renee, who had been bagging on The Expanse so hard, bagging on it, just came out in our text thread. It was like, season 2 of The Expanse is one of the best seasons of television I've ever seen.
I was like, what just happened there?
I know, right? I was like, oh my God. I was like, redemption, validation,
Yeah.
I'm rewatching The Expanse now for the third time. Because I'm doing a podcast with some people, with discussions on The Expanse.
Yeah. What's that one called again?
It's called Through the Ring, but we haven't started releasing the episodes yet.
Yeah,
we're going to wait till we get about halfway through, because we're going to release it weekly, and cover half a season in each episode. But we need to give ourselves the time to actually watch, and because some of the people who are doing it in the podcast have never seen it before, and sort of give us a chance to So once we've got like 6 or 7 episodes in the can, we'll start releasing it.
Let me ask about your writing process. Obviously, you're writing for different sort of media. How do you approach your writing?
Well, in some ways, regardless of medium, I approach certain things the same way all the time. And at least in the outlining phase, I try really hard to know what my story beats are. I use a pretty, I'm an adherent, a proponent of, I've read the book Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, the screenwriting book.
Yeah.
And his breakdown of the 3-act structure rings true to me. It works for me. It's not the end-all be-all of storytelling, because you have to, the structure itself is not the only thing. You have to really focus in on the characters, because character is everything in a story to me. But I always start with structure and outlining, and I don't really do a bullet points outline so much as I just write paragraphs,
Okay.
do a prose outline, but that's where I start with, regardless of medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's comics or if it's episodic television, something that's serialized and compartmentalized in nature, then I have to start thinking about how I'm going to break up the story and how I'm going to make it work and how long it's going to be and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think my writing process is being influenced by the process I use, or the process that I have to use when I work in animation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Which is premise, outline, first draft, second draft, polish.
Mm-hmm.
And because at each step of the way you're getting notes,
Mm-hmm.
and so I tend to think in those terms now. Do this phase, get notes. Okay, redo that phase, get notes. Okay, move on. Next phase, get notes. Blah blah blah. Then I'm easily distracted. I have the attention span of a hummingbird. So I literally have to, when I sit down to write, I have to turn app killers on, so I can't browse the net and I can't play any casual games on my phone. I can't do it, So I'm forced to do. The only things I can do are leave my office and go talk to my wife or watch TV or write.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps me get things done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm terrible.
Is it premature to ask what writing on a animation team is like, or what you expect it to be like?
This is my first real Sonic Prime is my first real experience working in a writer's room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it sort of has met my expectations in terms of process.
Right.
The people I'm working with, they have wildly exceeded my expectations. I have great collaborators. The EPs are wonderful. The story editor is wonderful. The other writers are all great. Everyone is generous and kind and open. Everyone's got a great sense of humor. It's a really good team. So that's exceeded my expectations wildly, because I know it's not always like that. But I expected that we would work together, coming up with the big story beats. You know what I mean? Like developing a season of serialized TV, because that's what TV is these days. It's almost always serialized,
Mm-hmm.
But then for it to be slightly more isolated when working, on your own episodes or whatever. And I am working, relatively closely with, a story editor and one or more of the executive producers, and it's not as isolated as things often are. In independent comics,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an editor. You know what I mean? I don't have anyone editing Hunter Black, which may be to its detriment. You know what I mean? Maybe I would be better served to have another voice, in my ear saying, "Have you considered that? What about this? That doesn't make sense." And so that helps. I like to think that I'm a natural collaborator. I will defend whatever the best idea is, whether it's mine or someone else's. And it always works best when everyone is like that. When people hear a good idea and they embrace it, as opposed to making sure their ideas are paramount.
Right.
I think I embraced a long time ago that there are 3 rules of being a professional writer, which are: you have to be talented, you have to hit your deadlines, and you can't be an asshole.
Yeah.
And my experience with the writer's room is those 3 things writ large.
Yeah. So tell me about some of the work you've done, non-writing work that you've done that's influenced sort of what you write and how you write.
Well, so I mentioned that I worked for the Hard Rock Cafe, and I worked there for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, if you work someplace for decades and you don't get really good at it, that's not a good thing. I was really good at the Hard Rock. I knew really well. I like to think that I'm naturally a people person, and that serves me well, and served me well in the service industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I like helping people get better at whatever it is they want to do. I do have a bit of a trainer's mentality. So I was a corporate trainer for them, and I opened cafes all over the world. I opened restaurants in South Africa, in Egypt, in Japan, in Vietnam, in Canada. I helped out all over the US. I was lucky to travel and see things and meet different kinds of people, and meeting different kinds of people is, in my opinion, the best thing a person can do for themselves and for the rest of the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's imperative. I think it's your civic duty to realize that it's not all about you,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are other concerns and considerations, and that everyone has a point of view, and everyone sees a different world through their eyes than you do, And I traveling and meeting all kinds of people and interacting with all kinds of people and helping them to, learn what it was I was trying to learn, to teach them, in essence, a restaurant subculture,
Mm-hmm.
that was invaluable to me, so I like, in my writing, to find, look, I'm a Western dude. I heavily influenced by American and European stuff, but I like to broaden the horizons of whatever I'm working on with stuff outside of, what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, I think it tends to make my experiences. I was just taken to task a little bit in a Facebook argument, because I was presenting my opinions as declarations. I was saying, this is the best, the best thing that this filmmaker has ever made, and this is why, and my declarative nature, I was, gently reminded
Mm-hmm.
that some people are intimidated by that sort of, that level of bombast. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that definitely comes from being someone who had to stand in front of groups of people and say, this is how things are, this is how they're going to be, and this is blah, blah, blah,
So considering there's all this different stuff you're into, when you were young, though, I always ask this of every interview,
Mm-hmm.
was there a particular power, technology, or fictional setting that you yearned to be part of or that you wanted?
Oh, wow.
I know there's a lot out there with your wild imagination, but
I think that I've always been drawn to, stories that are ostensibly, as a genre, the ordinary person taken to the extraordinary place.
Hmm.
Like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and John Carter and the Chronicles of Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
Narnia in particular was a big deal to me for a long time as a kid.
Hmm.
And the idea that, something like a closet or a wardrobe or, or a manhole cover, like I could see anything that was an aperture, an opening,
Mm-hmm.
to me conceivably could have been a gateway to another world,
Yeah.
And more than that, a world where I might be special, like really special.
Mm-hmm.
The first quote unquote adult novel I ever read was A Princess of Mars, by Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a story about John Carter was not an ordinary man. He was an extraordinary soldier, who goes to, a planet of war, and I loved those books so much. And I loved that idea of being taken to a new place, a magical place, a place where, the things that made me different made me special,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I was a weird kid. I had an imaginary twin brother, and my imaginary twin brother and I had imaginary girlfriends. And the four of us, which was just me in my room, the four of us would go on adventures in, strange places. I distinctly remember going ghost hunting in the fifth dimension. That was something that me and my friends did, in my mind, that sort of thing. Really. I used to fantasize as we were driving and I was sitting in the back seat. I would look out the window and I would fantasize about myself running at super speed alongside the car,
Yeah.
and going around and over things. That was something that was really big for me.
I did that too, but with my brother and I, we'd do that, but it wouldn't be us, but we'd have super fast vehicles that could transform from like cars to planes to
Oh wow.
whatever, just going over the
Yeah,
plains.
as you're watching the landscape go by, like seeing yourself. For me, it was running because I love the Flash.
Huh.
Um, but that was something that was really, really big for me. I wanted to have superpowers so badly when I was a kid, so badly, and I remember, when I was probably 6 years old or so,
Mhm.
and I was a full on comic book fan at that point, and I remember when when you could feel heat emanating off of something
Mhm.
or cold emanating. No one had ever explained that to me.
Mhm.
So I thought I was developing a super, like an extra sense.
Uh-huh.
I thought I convinced myself. I was like, oh man, I was like, I'm gonna. This is, and I said, this is only gonna get more powerful as I get older. Like I
Yeah.
knew that. And how like when you hold your hand up, but you look at something beyond your hand,
Yeah.
the image of your hand splits, and you can see through some of it.
Yeah.
I thought that was me developing X-ray vision. I went through this whole thing when I was a kid where I was like, I'm from Krypton. Oh my God. I was like, my parents must have found me as a child and they have raised me. They're teaching me to be better so that I can fight crime and protect the world one day. And I was like, and I will not let down my alien parents who sent me. Like I was so convinced, oh man. Yeah.
And then when did you find out that maybe you didn't have superpowers?
I think I eventually asked about, the vision thing. I was like, I can see through, blah, blah, blah. And, my dad explained it to me, and that was so disappointing.
Yeah.
It was so disappointing.
Oh, well, on to plan B.
Yeah, truth hurts, right?
Now you played high school football though. You weren't like a total, you
No, I
know.
played high school football and I wrestled. I
Yeah.
threw the hush shot, put in the discus. I did stuff. I mean, I ran around. I rode bikes and jumped over things and popped
Mhm.
wheelies, and I skateboarded a little bit. But if given my druthers, I would have read constantly.
Mm.
If it had been up to me, I would have read constantly. My mom, my parents would send me to my room
Mhm.
as a kid until they realized that I would just go to my room and read,
You're
and
like, "Oh, okay."
it wasn't penetrating that I was being punished.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they, instead of sending me to my room, my mom would make me sit on the steps.
Huh.
Going upstairs, I would just sit on the steps. I couldn't move. There was nothing to read, nothing to do. I would just
Mhm.
sit there and cry.
Right.
And, you know.
Huh.
But I also, I mean, my mom just showed me. I just had a birthday, so my mom was sending me pictures and stuff,
Mhm.
and pictures of me and neighborhood kids with towels pinned around our necks, so we could
Uh,
have capes, and
yeah.
and I remember like there being this sort of hedge bush sort of thing uh near our house that you could meander around inside of, and there were like little alcoves in the bushes and stuff, and we would horse around and play. I mean, I was a relatively outdoorsy kid, at least when I was younger, and I was always a social kid. I always got along with the kids in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
I always had friends to play games with and stuff. Um,
When did you write your first story?
oh man, I started writing my first story probably when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah, okay.
I was creating superheroes and drawing them, and then I started writing a story called Murder in Manhattan because that sounded cool to me and I liked alliteration.
Yeah.
Again, when I was maybe 6 years old, I thought I was going to write a mystery novel, and I wrote a few pages of that.
Mhm.
And I created these two protagonists, Mark Stone and Steve Jennings, and I wrote stories about them. They were like sort of like secret agents,
Okay.
but they were secret agents in the Nick Fury of Shield mode more than the James Bond mode.
Oh, okay.
Really sci-fi spy stuff.
Mhm.
And I remember that their spy organization was contained within NASA. You know what I mean? Like it was NASA's like Black Ops division or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
um, um,
because you know that exists.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I played football. I played sports. I did speech and debate. I did Model UN. I was in the chess club.
Mhm.
I did a lot of stuff. I had, my parents. Recently, I went back home because my sister passed away, and I was visiting with my mom. A lot of my sister's friends were coming over, and kids that I knew in my childhood,
Mhm.
and they were all comment about how in my house was where they learned to have diverse tastes.
Hmm.
You
Wow.
know, my parents, we were exposed to an incredible breadth of music.
Mhm.
R&B and soul and a little rock and roll and classical and jazz and world music. Like all of that was stuff that we heard regularly.
Mhm.
And then like I show up in the 80s as I'm a teenager, like 13 years old, and I start to discover music that's nothing like what my parents are into, like the art of noise and electronic music and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and I expose my siblings to that. But my house was like that in every respect. My mom was always cooking dishes from. My wife just made my childhood favorite dish, which is this African peanut stew called mafe.
Hmm.
I mean, we grew up eating, a broad variety of things and reading a broad variety of things, and
Mhm.
being questioned and challenged in our opinions. And
Mhm.
so I was lucky, very lucky to have been exposed to a lot of different things and to understand that there was even more that I wasn't being exposed to.
Do you think your high school, like where you went to school, were you exposed to how was your school education? You feel like it
Well,
was up
I
to what you
went
wanted?
I went to two different high schools.
Uh-huh.
My freshman and sophomore year, I went to a super snooty private school called St. Albans.
Mm.
And I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say at St. Albans, I met Jesse Jackson, one of Jesse Jackson's sons. I went to school with him.
Mm.
I met I met Rockefellers.
Mhm.
I met at the time Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush because his grandchildren were going to school there,
Mm.
and so he would come up with Secret Service and run track on our track
Mhm.
while we were out there at football practice.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he came up and shook our hands, and we got to talk to the Secret Service guys. You know what I mean? And like, I remember talking to him. I was like, "Hey, what's in your bag?" He was like, "It ain't my lunch, kid." Like, like, you know. Um, and yeah, we got to try out. I got exposed to a lot of cool stuff there.
Mhm.
My second school was Benjamin Banneker Model Academic Senior High School, a
Mm.
public school, but it was like a magnet school. It was you know, an alternative look at educating high school kids. It was a bit of an experiment.
Yeah.
And those two schools, yeah, I met a really interesting array of different kinds of people. Um, I was I'll never forget my AP US history class. That was one of the formative classes of my entire things
Mm.
I've ever done.
Oh, yeah.
My AP English teacher let me write my thesis paper on Frank Miller.
Yeah. Nice.
We had to pick an author. So I picked
Uh-huh.
Frank Miller, and he was like, you know what? He goes, I don't know comics. He goes, but I have a friend who knows comics, so he'll help me grade it. And
Yeah.
I got to do that.
Yeah.
Um, we got to take all kinds of interesting trips. Both schools had a focus on community service and outreach.
Mhm.
With St. Albans, me and a group of kids went down to I don't remember if it was Kentucky or Tennessee, but we went down to one of those two with Habitat for Humanity to help make houses for the homeless.
Mhm.
Um, I believe my high school experience. I loved my high school experiences.
Sure.
I was a terrible student. I don't like doing busy work. I don't like learning at the pace of the slowest person in the class.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, not only was I a bad student, I was a student. You know what I mean? I was a pain in the ass. I know I was. You know, uh, I've never had a greater example of that than when I had to serve jury duty, because I was super impatient during that experience. You know what I mean? And it was terrible. Like, I didn't like the lawyers, and so I was really, I was
Oh,
really,
wow.
and I was super. I got admonished twice by the judge for
Sir.
for talking, and asking questions. Jurors aren't allowed to ask questions. You know what I mean? Like, but nonetheless, I had a lot of great teachers who would take a personal interest in me and helping me learn things and trying to engage me, who thought I was smart, if somewhat, unmotivated, and would try to engage me. I was fortunate in my high school experiences, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know why this popped in my mind. I wanted to ask this before. So your favorite DC movie, your favorite Marvel movie, and I don't know if anyone else has been doing comic book movies.
Okay. My favorite DC movie is the original Superman with Christopher Reeve, Superman 1978. There are some good DC movies. The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan movie. The first Wonder Woman is amazing. But at the end of the day, every good superhero film owes a debt to Superman the movie. That movie is so good. And so it embraces who Superman is. It's emotionally resonant. You know what I mean? It's understands at a certain level you have to ask about, if you're telling a Superman story, about how to use power responsibly. In an enormous power, and it's and it was cool. I love that movie. I watched it again this past year, and it still it thrills me. Plus, you can't go wrong if you have John Williams doing the score.
Yeah.
My favorite Marvel movie. It's a toss-up.
Okay.
It's hard. There's a hard question, because Captain America is my favorite Marvel character.
Okay.
Before Marvel Studios began doing their thing, I did not believe Captain America could be translated to film well. I just didn't believe I would ever like it. The Captain America movies are hands down the best series of movies under the Marvel umbrella. In my opinion, none of the others are as consistently good. Winter Soldier, the second Captain America movie, was at that point one of the coolest movie watching experiences I'd ever had. That have my one of my very favorite characters done in such a cool movie, was something. And more than that, the Russo brothers, who directed that movie, know a little something about advancing the story through action and giving you a truly emotionally resonant climax. Okay. And so, both of the Cap movies they did, both Winter Soldier and Civil War, the final battle in Winter Soldier, there's these helicarriers shooting, boom, boom, boom in the skies and all that. But at the end of the day, it's this guy trying to save his best friend. And they're fighting each other. And it's super emotionally resonant.
Yeah.
And then in the sequel to that, Civil War, it's Cap versus Iron Man again for, with Cap's best friend in the balance. Amazingly good stuff. But then Endgame, when Captain America picks up Thor's hammer and starts fighting Thanos. And more than that, when he gets up and after Thanos knocks him down, he's getting up and he does not believe he's going to win, but that's not going to stop him from fighting. I love that so much.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's Winter Soldier or if it's Endgame. They're both amazing,
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned to you before that, I is in a group apartment. I roomed with Tony Russo, so I know some of his.
Oh, really?
For a year, a year in college.
Oh, wow.
So I know some of his influences. So I'm not surprised at all how well they did with those movies, knowing what they were into, what Tony was into, and as the two of them, what they liked.
That's
So
cool.
yeah,
That's really
really
cool. I
into
didn't know that.
yeah, they were really into 70s movies, and I saw some of that influence in some of their Cap stuff, like that
Oh,
old
for sure.
70s
Yeah.
vibe.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
I love the 70s too. So that's awesome.
yeah,
Oh, but Marvel's best movie actually is neither one of those. The best Marvel movie is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
yeah, that's a good one.
That movie's incredible. I can't believe how good that movie is. Great soundtrack. Again, super emotionally resonant film.
Hmm.
Funny and genius execution in terms of the visuals. Genius execution. That movie, I always say that's a top 5 animated film of all time and a top 5 superhero film of all time.
Yeah, that one
Yeah.
just I did not know. I know everyone was like, "Oh, this is so great, you got to see it." I didn't know what to expect, and I loved what I saw. That was
Yeah,
so
it's
good.
crazy. I mean, if I was asked what are the 2 best superhero films, I might say Into the Spider-Verse and The Incredibles.
Hmm.
I might say they're both animated. Those 2 movies are fantastic.
Hmm. Yeah. What about shows?
My favorite show is The West Wing. That is my favorite TV show. That's not a genre show. It's not, it's just, but I just, and I see its flaws, but I just love it. The first 4 seasons of that show are phenomenal.
Hmm.
Um, I think you can learn a whole lot about storytelling by watching Star Trek.
Hmm.
I think, Next Generation, there are so many great episodes of that show. Once it found its own identity, once it stopped trying to be Star Trek the sequel,
Hmm.
and it actually became Star Trek the Next Generation,
Yeah.
it got really, really good.
Yeah.
I
But
love The Expanse. We talked about that already.
yeah.
Um,
But I was actually asking about, no, I'm glad to hear what you just said, but I was actually wondering about comic book shows.
comic book shows. Okay. Um, the original Batman 66 was very formative for me. I loved that show as a little kid. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard not to say that Batman the Animated Series isn't the best um, show, but there are a lot of good ones now. Young Justice is a good animated show, a really good version of the DC universe.
Hmm.
Oh man, the first seasons of Daredevil and Jessica Jones on Netflix
Mhm.
were insane, so good.
Yeah.
And are you watching WandaVision?
I'm going to. I haven't had a chance to, but I know everyone's talking about it, and
I hope it hasn't been spoiled for you. It is
not yet.
like it's one of those, again, kind of like The Expanse. You got to let yourself get through the first couple episodes
Hmm.
because they're setting something up. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
And you're kind of, my wife, the first couple episodes, she was like, okay, babe, if you say so. This is really weird. Like it's certainly, if you watch just the first 2 episodes of that show,
Mhm.
you're going to be left thinking, this is not what I go to Marvel for.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, with only 1 episode left, it's like, oh my God, this is the next great Marvel thing. You know what I mean? Like it's really good. It's really
Yeah.
good.
I got to see it. But yeah, I just haven't had a chance yet.
And it's funny. I just watched Iron Man last night, the first Iron Man,
Oh, okay.
and I was reminded that Paul Bettany did the voice of Jarvis in the first Iron Man, and Jarvis eventually becomes the Vision in the Marvel movies.
Hmm.
So Paul Bettany is the longest tenured actor in the MCU.
Yeah, that's a trivia question there.
Yeah,
Huh.
because Robert Downey's done. And Nick Fury. Samuel Jackson has a cameo at the very end of that movie.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's Paul Bettany is really the longest tenured actor in the MCU.
Huh. Interesting. Um, So I guess I want to ask, well, I've hit a whole bunch of points. So I guess you can't, like we said before, you can't say anything about Sonic except that you're on the writing team.
Except that I'm writing it, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I will confirm that Sonic will run fast on this show. I will confirm that.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You're not gonna do a twist with. Well, I'm not even gonna joke. Even jokes can go sideways in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Um. Okay, so that'll keep you tied up for a little while. Normally I ask what your next project is, but you're just starting a project, so.
Well, I'm in the middle. I'm squarely in the middle of this of my time on Sonic Prime,
Mhm,
at least for the first season.
mhm.
Um,
When is it supposed to come out? When does it air?
sometime in 2022.
Okay, that's the schedule.
Yeah.
Um, and
Um,
and you don't have to.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask. So the animators, they get the script and then they start doing the animating, right? That's how it works.
Some of the stuff they do ahead of time,
Okay.
like in the writing, I've had, I don't think this is betraying any confidences. I've had some, concept art at least to refer to, because, things have to be built. You know what I mean? Like the visuals have to be built. So the story stuff, yeah, that has to wait for the scripts.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I mean, the animation team will come back and say, yeah, we can't animate what you just wrote. You have to figure something else out.
Oh, that happens?
Oh, sure.
Hmm. I guess so. I guess I hadn't thought about that, but, I guess that would throw a whole wrench into whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but I
I
guess.
mean, I, you know, it's a cliche about getting notes when you're a writer in Hollywood,
Mhm,
and how bad they always are. That has not been I get a lot of notes, don't get me wrong, but,
mhm,
and I get notes from multiple sources, I mean,
mhm,
Sonic is a Sega property. The show's going to be on Netflix. There's an animation studio involved. You know what I'm saying? Like they all have to give notes.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but I've been lucky that I feel like almost every note has been something where I'm like, I either have to explain this better or yeah, I have to change this. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not.
I guess the executive producer, is that the referee sort of like who decides what's what?
I don't want to say that. I can't really speak to the role of executive producers exactly.
Mhm,
I know that our executive producers are pretty hands-on, and they definitely are people, we can talk to about story. I mean, but they're like the creators of the show in that sense. You know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah. Okay, so where can people find you online? Where's your website, your social media, all that?
Well, the first best place to find me is at hunterblackcomx.com. We
Okay.
post a new page of the comic every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I just posted yesterday, page 1386 went up.
Mm, wow.
Tomorrow, I will be reviewing the 3 pages that we'll be posting for next week. I'll be
Mm,
reviewing the lettering, making sure that everything makes sense. Nothing needs to be rewritten. Every Sunday, I also, one of our revenue streams for Hunter Black is our Patreon account.
mhm,
People can support the comic through Patreon. And one of the rewards for people who give us $5 a month, I preview the week's upcoming pages for them,
yeah,
and I do commentary on those pages. I talk about our creative process. Whatever I'll provide links to what I'm referring back to earlier in the comic.
mhm.
Um, I might say, look, this was named after my friend Cris Alvarez's D&D character. Blah blah blah. And this character is an asshole. Chris's character is not an asshole, but that doesn't matter. Something like that. Um, uh,
And that's just Hunter Black Comics and S.
Hunter Black Comics with an S at the end. Yes,
Yeah.
hunterblackcomx.com.
Mhm,
You can follow me on Twitter at hunterblackcom letter X,
mm,
COMX.
Okay.
I have my own website, justinpeniston.com. Peniston is spelled very regrettably, one end in the middle, one end at the end. Or you can find me. I'm also a member of the Popskl podcast group, Popskl. It's an anagram. It's an abbreviation for pissed off psychic scary kids of LA. Because one of my co-hosts was in a picture and she looked like one of those crazy like Children of the Corn kids, like staring at the camera. It's like she looks, she looks like this pissed off scary psychic kid. So, and that just morphed into our name, so now we're called Popskl.
That's cool.
Yeah, and you can find Hunter Black Comics on Facebook. You can find me at hunterblackwriter on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. hunterblackwriter, Instagram.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have. You have any final thoughts or words to wrap this discussion up?
You know what? I got my first shot of the vaccine today, just before we did this, actually.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind people to wear your damn masks. Keep wearing your masks, like maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but only if we act right. So act right, wear your mask. That's my final thought.
Yeah. And you can wear a cool mask, get
I got some cool paisley masks. My mother-in-law makes me like masks out of like Hawaiian print and stuff like that. Yeah, you wear a cool mask. Rep your fandom. Get a freaking, I don't know, get a Dodgers mask or a Lakers mask or you're in DC. Get a football team mask.
Washington football team mask.
Yeah,
Do they have a logo?
A W.
W.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Justin. Well, thank you very much for talking to me about all this. It's been really fun.
Cris, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, cool. In the next episode, I speak with Suparno Banerjee, who's written a book on Indian science fiction. Hit the subscribe button to catch that episode. Thank you for watching this video version of Full Contact Nerd Interviews. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you'd like more book suggestions or information on fiction and storytelling, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, my YouTube channel, Cris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. If you're looking for military history and general history, including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, War Scholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. Thank you for watching, and keep imagining the past, the present, and the future. Hello, I'm Cris Alvarez, and perhaps you can't tell by looking at me, but I am a nerd. I've been a nerd for many years, and I'm good at it. In this show, I'd like to give you the tips on how to be the most successful and well-informed nerd that you can possibly be. I speak with interesting people about cool things. Please join us if you're so inclined. This is Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and welcome. Suave, that was suave, right? Yeah, that was good. Darling.